All right, we got it. All right, welcome everyone to discussions outside of the textbook. Want to let you know that next week, March 13th, from 11 to 12:30, we'll be joined by STC philosopher James Sikima to discuss on tyranny's lessons 14 and 19, establish a private life and be a patriot. Um, and then March 27th, from 11 a.m. to 12:30, historian Martha Cantu will join us for an examination of the patriarchy, which is going to be a dialogue drawing upon the insights of Harriet Jacobs and Charlotte Perkins Gilman, based on Incidents of the Life of a Slave Girl and The Yellow Wallpaper, two texts from our common reading program from the last couple of years. But today we're continuing our discussion on Timothy Snyder's text on tyranny, 20 lessons from the 20th century, which is a compact guide for modern citizens on resisting authoritarianism. Drawing on 20th century European history, Snyder stresses that democracy is often fragile and demands constant defense. So today we are examining lessons 10 and 11. And lesson 10, believe in truth. Snyder argues that rejecting objective truth is the foundation of tyranny, linking fascism to contemporary rhetoric. Truth is essential, he argues, as an essential infrastructure for liberty. Truth destroyed is destroyed by four things, he points out: outright lies, endless repetition, magical thinking with contradictions, and misplaced faith in leaders. Snyder calls the post-truth era pre-fascism. Asserting truth is a civic duty and a defense against authoritarianism, which uses echoes of the totalitarian playbooks. A society that accepts creative myths over verifiable facts, Snyder points out, loses the capacity for rational criticism, enabling permanent power to entrench itself for one person or a class of people. And in lesson 11, investigate, this is a lesson that demands virtue and personal responsibility of the individual over simply relying on what people in power do. And it's a counteract to the lesson 10, and basically a destruction of truth. Resistance must involve actively producing and defending factual reality. Snyder urges support for verifiable facts over spectacle and misinformation, contrasting ethical journalism and as the necessary antidote to mainstream media desertion and isolating nature of the internet and its echo chambers. Drawing on thinkers like Havel, he emphasizes that living in truth is a nonviolent threat to systems built on lies. Snyder sharply critiques the internet for hindering discernment and making isolated groups susceptible to manipulation. Investigate shifts responsibility to individual citizens, calling for a small revolution to verify information, follow trusted reporters, and subsidize investigative journalism. Snyder frames sharing fake news as an ethical failure, urging citizens to invest in truth. In summary, the necessary response to modern tyranny is a commitment to intellectual rigor and spiritual courage. It requires defending objective truth against falsehoods through independent investigation and critical thought, anchored in revolutionary and political practice of radical acceptance. The defense of verifiable fact and the cultivation of an ethical heart are the twin pillars of liberty. So throughout this, anybody who's joining us, feel free to come into the chat anytime for any comments, insights, or questions, or simply open up your mic. And today we are joined with historian Renee Rios from the History Department and Dr. Christopher Nelson, philosopher and Dean of the Liberal Arts. So welcome, gentlemen. And I thought we would start off. This is kind of, I think, your wheelhouse, Chris, dealing with the truth as a philosopher. Um, I thought I would open it up to you to launch us into this. What struck you about lesson 10, things that you wanted us to immediately jump into?
Well, I was obviously I was immediately put in mind of I mean, this is the first time that you and I have talked about this in this format. I think the first time I came on this podcast with you, I don't know how many years ago was that?
About
We're
30
talking
years
about,
ago?
yeah,
Yeah.
the post-truth era and, America's what I refer to as America's first postmodern president. So yeah, when we speak about post-truth, I still think I could be wrong, but I still think it's important to keep two separate senses of that word in mind, because already in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, there's this movement in French and German, and some might even say arguably American philosophy that was really critical of things like master narratives. They're very, very suspicious of someone claiming the power to have the power of and over truth. And so philosophically, this was sort of our initiation into what we might call a post-truth or a postmodern era, a skepticism of truth with a capital T. But I think more obviously, what Snyder has his sights set on is not this critical philosophical reflection on the problem of what is truth, but sort of this disingenuous and or lazy and or malicious just disregard for truth of any kind, if
Yeah,
if that makes sense. But then at the end of the day, and Schneider was at Yale, wasn't he?
I believe so. Yeah.
Yeah. So depending on which camps he ran in, he could well be of the mind that no, 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 both of those ideas of post-truth are pre-fascism. That you read Heidegger, you get the seeds for post-structuralism, and you also get the seeds for National Socialism.
Mm. What about Yale makes you suspect that?
Well, that they had in there for a time, they were a real hotbed of continental philosophy, which are sort of the post-truth, post-structuralist types. They're one of the first breeding grounds for that, large-scale breeding grounds for that in America, this side of the pond. And so I think Schneider was probably in the history department. So if he, depending on what type of relationship he had with that school of thought and philosophy, he could well be thinking of them in particular as he's writing this chapter. All these philosophers saying what is truth, you're basically setting the stage for the next Nazi regime.
Yes. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but postmodernism isn't necessarily a rejection of objective truth, and I could be completely wrong on that, but is it more of an intellectual tool to go, okay, there's various narratives out there, and so if we have a grand narrative, we might be missing uh, critical perspectives that can perhaps help us understand objective reality.
It's that, but it's also instinctively maybe not skeptical, but certainly critical of any claims to objective truth because I think we're living in a very different zeitgeist now. But the concern then was the totalitarian powers or the would-be totalitarians would claim a monopoly on truth. There is an objective truth, and I've got it. I am the purveyor of it. And so they were instinctively critical of people who would claim to be in possession of capital T truth because philosophically it's still an open question. What in the world do we mean by truth anyways?
Yeah, it's it's a complex question.
I don't want to get all Pontius Pilate on you, but
Yeah, yeah. Mr. Rios, was there anything that you wanted to introduce the discussion with that struck you from either lessons?
Um, oh, sorry. I think I'm on, right? Yeah, I'm on.
Yeah, we hear you.
I think when I was looking at number 10, or at least lesson 10, I kind of boiled it down to what I thought was what Snyder was getting across in 10. And which probably flies in the face of what Dr. Nelson just told us about is what is real and what is true.
awesome.
When you, but my initial thought was when you ignore or you abandon reason, when you ignore or abandon logic, when you like abandon or set aside critical thought and analysis, and when you don't really trust what you're actually seeing in front of you, or what you're actually hearing or listening to when it comes to leadership, then you are effectively abandoning, in my sense, in my mind, you're effectively abandoning reality and what you're objectively seeing. And so I guess it kind of goes along with this, maybe this postmodernist thing. And then the enemies of, I guess, untruth, lies, and so on is the embracing of critical thought, critical reasoning, and then questioning what you're hearing versus what you're actually seeing or observing, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and that puts me in mind of, I think, a very important, at least etymological connection. Philosophers will speak of truth, but you just now spoke of trust. Etymologically, they stem from the same root, and so it's philosophically we can ask, what is the truth? But ethically, we can ask, whom should we trust? What should we trust?
And the other thing about 11, just kind of to kind of winnow a little bit into 11, when you're looking at, or when we're looking at news sites, when we're listening to talk radio, everyone has their particular bias, one way or the other, right? And what I tend to do is listen to CNN, read the Washington Post, look at the Monitor, but I also, on the ride home from work or from classes or the ride to classes, is I'll take a swing over to our local news talk station, 710 AM, and I'll listen to these broadcasts and then think to myself, okay, am I really off base by thinking that what news talk radio, which tends to be very, very conservative, are they saying something that I can objectively at least kind of agree with? Or am I crazy by saying, no, they're nuts, they're loose? And that's kind of the balance back and forth that I'm trying to strike between that element versus the moderate or the left element, and kind of somewhere putting myself kind of right in the middle, but probably leaning a little bit more left than I am right. So I'm at least open to listening to both sides. And
Yeah,
then, yeah, I'm really not crazy. Okay.
yeah, and that sort of, I think, makes you an anomaly these days. We're probably anomalous in this regard, that the two sides aren't really interested in listening to each other. So yeah, I would carve this up into a couple of different versions. The people who are speaking, we'll just use Snyder's language. The people are speaking post-truth or untruth, but doing it with a sincere heart. They actually believe that what they're saying is true. And those who know that they're full of it and are, disingenuously or maliciously purveying
Yeah.
untruth, post-truth, mistruth. So it comes
Which,
down to, again, a question of trust.
yeah, and again, that strengthens, I guess, in some senses, the investigate chapter. You
Yeah.
look for stuff on your own, make your own decisions based on all the information that you have in front of you, which as all of us know, you, Dr. Nelson, Mr. Sean, and myself, which is essentially what we're trying to get across to most of our classes. Don't be so closed off to avoid considering other possibilities, because as scholars, as students in training to become really good scholars and whatever it is they want to choose, if they decide to go the academic route, you need to be at least open to those possibilities and then support one side or the other, or put in a different interpretation altogether.
Yeah.
Yeah. Miles Diaz in the comment asks a question. Could one make the argument that control of the objective truth means control of human consciousness, be it here in the US or our foreign policy?
Control of the objective truth means
I
control.
would say it depends on how deep and profound that control is, because I don't think merely controlling the narrative would necessarily directly affect human consciousness. But if you have total control of the narrative, you can rule out a lot of other narratives, and in that way sort of indirectly impact the contours or the capacities of human consciousness is my first thought. I think it's a fascinating question.
And just for visual means, if any of us watched the film 1984, then that really is, the state basically really does control what it wants to be delivered as the truth, right? And then that transfers over into consciousness, and at least I believe so. when you don't have the ability to have different interpretations, different points of view, then you subject, or at least you subsume the the individuality in favor of the many, which in that case would be the state, I suppose.
Yeah.
Or it just happens.
Sorry, Chris, go on.
I was just saying, or it happens really sort of naturally that if you're not exposed to critical and competing and often contradictory perspectives, if you don't have to wrestle with that, you're never going to give an opportunity to exercise something like critical thinking. And if you don't exercise that muscle, it's going to atrophy. So, yeah, you might
And,
be
and
on
I
something
and
there.
I think in the film, the character, what is it, Winston Smith?
With
Yeah.
Smith, yeah.
Yeah, so he's a worker bee in the information sector of wherever he works, but clandestinely he's keeping his own journal and his own thoughts and his own log. So in that environment, he's basically trying to assert some kind of human individuality in the face of complete control on information as it's disseminated to the masses, right? And he does so outside of view of the camera that watches everybody, right?
Yeah, but then to get back to your point, if his only snorkel to, truth is his private diary, at what point does he start wondering, am I insane?
Yeah, that's a great point. It does take a community to discern the truth. Hey, Renee, I'm really glad you brought up 1984. Chris and I did a learning community years ago where Chris introduced into the curriculum Neil Postman's Amusing Ourselves to Death, where he made the comparison between 1984 and
Brave New World.
Brave New World. And it was an interesting dichotomy that basically what he concluded is we're no longer in a situation where we need the state to control the narrative. We're going to do it for ourselves. And I think what he was getting at, and what I think Snyder is getting at here, is that if we do indeed hold liberty, our rights, as a virtue, it is incumbent on us to really cultivate virtue, personal responsibility. There's the chair of the philosophy department is doing a great job of posting thematic quotes on the front of the suite, and he posted a quote from James Madison. And so I thought I would share it with everybody. Let me put it in the chat so people can follow along. And we got a couple more questions, so I'll get to the questions after I blather on here. But this is from James Madison. This great Republican principle that the people will have virtue and intelligence to select men of virtue and wisdom. Is there no virtue among us? If there not be, we are in a wretched situation. No theoretical checks, no form of government can render us secure. To suppose that any form of government will secure liberty or happiness without any virtue in the people is a chimerical idea. If did I just screw that word up? Chimerical idea?
Chimerical.
Yeah. If there be sufficient virtue and intelligence in the community, it will be exercised in the selection of these men, so that we do not depend on their virtue or put confidence in our rulers, but in the people who are to choose them. And what struck me in lesson 10 is he points out this thing that Klemper was talking about of an amputated soldier. And, despite everything, this guy lost his limb. And this guy that he's talking to or interviewing says, Hitler has never lied yet. I believe in Hitler. And it's a very striking phenomena within the human psyche. And maybe it's even part of our DNA that we have a tendency to give over our agency, to look towards more powerful men in this sort of way of deferring to people, and I find that very interesting. Just as to bring in Christianity to that seems to be a critical a warning within that theology of do not put your trust in men and princes, because there's no salvation in that. But just thought
Yeah.
I'd throw that out there just to see, yeah, what is this? And maybe Chris, you have something to offer, maybe a philosopher you can share, a type of philosophy that points out this tendency for us to abandon our virtue and to really just put our trust in people with power over us to our detriment.
Well, it's easy. I don't think we need to get too deep about it. It's easy, and in some sense, it's natural because it's easy. But I think this returns us to, if we scroll back up to Shelby's
Yeah,
question
yeah.
in an interesting way. The first time I read it, I had one take, but now, given what we've just talked about, I have a different take on it.
So yeah, do you believe do you believe it's the individual's responsibility to look for the truths, or should the media, news, and lawmakers just be truthful? Oh, very interesting.
And I kind of want to say, can we have both? But I'm immediately put in mind of this tendency. Then, what if you live in a nation state with state-controlled media and state-controlled politicos? Where does one put one's truth or faith or trust? And I think
And
that's sort of
go ahead.
kind of a genius move that the disingenuous, malicious post-truthers are using now is they saw how totalitarian regimes were criticized and upended and taken down, and they're using those critiques on contemporary journalism and university professors. We'd say, in Soviet Russia, don't believe the news. Okay, in 2026 America, don't believe the news.
Yeah. But then that, I think that kind of goes to, what is it, Denise's question? Social media, the digital influence on people to jump to their truth before using their critical thinking. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is entirely true. Most folks will tend to believe the subjective social media posts, but without exploring beyond that, using critical thought, critical analysis to figure out what is objectively real. You know what I mean? What is reality?
And Sean, you and I were just having this conversation in another group earlier this week. How new is the technology of the current era? Are we seeing new problems? Are we seeing the old problems amplified? Or is it the same as it's always been?
Yeah, I think, well, I mean, one thing that comes to mind of it being different is how consistent it is. Renee, Chris, myself, news used to be scheduled, right? If you missed the news at 6, then you
You
maybe got a
missed it.
chance to see it at 11. And so that provided at least an atmosphere for a little bit more of a healthy discourse, because our hormonal uh, cortisone systems weren't being hijacked all the time. I mean, we're constantly just being inundated and keeping us in a constant state of threat and peril, and that's damaging, because then it puts us into a fight or flight position where we don't have time to self-reflect, to pause and just to enjoy life. So yeah, in that sense, it's very different. But if you know anything about the early republic, um, journalism was just as nasty and backbiting as arguably as it is today, right? It was very insulting. So I think the technology has probably intensified it, and the availability has intensified it, but there's also just kind of the human fallibility
Yeah.
that.
And I think Shelby is right here in the comments. The difference is that we're inundated with constant flows and streams of information that it's hard to keep up with what it is, with what you're hearing or seeing, because things change because of the digital and the social stuff. It changes really, really fast and really, really quickly, and it's really hard to catch up or to stay current with whatever you think that you want to listen to at a given point in time, at any point during the day, or whatever it is that's going on in the world around us, right? And there's a hand, Sean. There's a
Yeah,
hand.
I see Miles wants to jump in the pool.
Yeah.
Yeah, jump on in, Miles.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I guess someone that's been born and grew up post 9/11, grew up before or grew up not knowing a world before internet, like I think technology has its intents were to connect us more, but it just has further alienated us because I think people can engage or feel like they're mimicking the feeling of engagement either online or online gambling or online Reddit posting or 4chan posting from the convenience of their bedroom versus going out into the public and participating in discourse because yeah, I think back then the medium was a lot different, but the rhetoric was still just as dirty, if not more aggressive. And I don't think that's changed, but I think it's rather been funneled to an individual to be frozen and almost anxious because of the overwhelmingness of all these different narratives and the flow of information is nonstop. Because my parents used to tell me, "Hey, in the 70s on cable at 10 p.m. there was no TV.
Yeah.
Like you would hear the national anthem, and that was a signal
That
to
was
go to
Yeah.
bed,
that was it. Yes, that
and
was
that was
it.
it. Where is that? Where is that? That doesn't exist anymore. And I think that comes with more problems than it does solutions. That's what I want
Yeah.
to share.
Yeah, no, and I think that's great. And you could filter this one of two ways, and they're probably both true and they overlap. You could attribute this to just the sheer profit motive. We want to keep you online to keep generating ad clicks. Or there could be something actually politically malicious about this. If I can keep you continuously engaged online, I am preventing you from actually being engaged in anything concrete.
Which
And I
is,
think seeing the confluence of those two things is really, really frightening
yeah.
because it's mutually empowering, even if they don't intend to be.
And I think that's largely the point of chapter or lesson
11.
for
Yeah.
Snyder, right? And I think Miss Shelby is right too, that it's one thing to hear what's going on, but it's another to actually see it and then reconcile the two when one is not what you're actually seeing, right?
Yeah. Hey, yeah, to get into investigate, he opens it up, and David Foster Wallace comes to mind, and perhaps Chris can help us out with this. What is truth? Sometimes people ask this question because they wish to do nothing.
Yeah.
Generic cynicism makes us feel hip and alternative, even as we slip along with our fellow citizens into a morass of indifference. And so, yeah, that cynicism, that's something not very well read in David Foster Wallace, but I do know that he was very concerned with irony and cynicism of this kind of front and um, a shield of being vulnerable with your fellow brothers and sisters to basically just to admit I'm afraid and I don't know what to do and and you have this tool, this weapon of the cynicism and irony. Yeah, is there anything that you can bring in here, Chris, from
Yeah. Well, I mean, DFW was, early Gen X or at least proto Gen X. And so this is sort of the classic, even during our generation, this was the classic criticism of our generation, that we have this veneer of stylish cynicism, but we're not cynical for any reason. It's just a style that we've adopted.
Mm. Without a foundation on which to
Yeah.
base it.
Yeah, because I mean, and I hate using that word because it comes from the Greek word kunik, which meant dog, and it was a word that Diogenes, the philosopher, applied to himself. He was a self-named cynic or kunik, by which he meant, he didn't believe in anything, but he had philosophical reasons for not believing in anything. He just thought the things other people believed in were so preposterous, and they believed in things for no reason. So yeah, the original cynic is one of my favorite philosophers, but the word's acquired kind of a different meaning in today's zeitgeist.
the yeah, the for-profit journalism, I think, is our main predicament rather than state-run media, and this is a real issue. And this is something I don't wouldn't be. I'm not saying I would push back on Snyder, but his emphasis on print media, obviously, that is a more effective medium as far as informing yourself. But he seems to say that go always to print media and avoid online videos or whatever. And I guess I would just put a caveat in there. because print journalism can be just as cynical and misleading as any kind of video presentation of the news.
Yeah.
What I would suggest and kind of add to Snyder's concern here and urging is one, look for dignity in journalism, and where they're getting their source of money, right? And so I do find a lot of hope in mediums like uh, what is that, Stack journalism, or even in podcasts where they aren't soliciting advertisers and it is 100% funded by listeners. Um, so where the journalist or the commentator can maintain a degree of integrity and dignity rather than oh, I'm being paid to say this and to say it like this, which is really now the assumption of, I mean, that has to be the assumption of any news media, that these people are just paid actors and they're just putting on the costume of a journalist.
All right, so you problematize Schneider, and I'm going to take it one step further and make that problem even more wicked. Because if the echo chamber has already been created, then a listener funded podcast could be just as untruth as anything else.
Yeah, and I think that's where personal responsibility and virtue come into play, and personal discernment, which within the echo chamber, I get your point, can be quite difficult to make that claim. Um, so we're not just complaining and saying that the sky's coming down. Yeah, anyone here, including the hosts, including any student out there or anyone from the community, what are some, and you can put this in the chat too, but what are some forms of journalism out there that you find that have integrity, that you trust, um, that are informative, and it could be something that you might not necessarily agree with 100% as well.
Well, I for one am, how should I put this without sounding too old? I've never,
I'll get the references, Renee.
okay. um, I refuse to believe that ABC News, NBC News, and CBS News are fundamentally untrue deliveries of what is actually happening on a daily basis, right?
I'll put an asterisk on CBS.
Yeah, well, ABC I've tended to trust for years because it goes all the way back to Peter Jennings and even before Peter Jennings and that whole line up and through David Muir. I also tend to trust, for better or worse, and I think Sean mentioned or may have referred to Substack as a news
Yeah,
source.
Substack. Yeah, thank you.
And I love, for instance, the political cartoons that Ann Telnace draws now for Substack. She was a political cartoonist for the Washington Post, but she tried to print a political cartoon, but the Post basically censored it and wouldn't allow her to post it on the site, or at least with the Washington Post. So she resigned in protest. Substack picked her up, and every time that she puts out a political cartoon, I love them. Number one, they're well, they're political statements, effectively, right? Using art as political statements. So, and the downside, I think, to society today is that we just don't have much in the way of print newspapers much longer, right? The Monitor has only prints 2 papers a week rather than daily, and everything else is an online delivery for their news sources.
Yeah, could you put that individual in the chat when you get a chance, Renee? Yeah, one person I would point out is Ryan Grimm from Drop Site News, who's broken some pretty important stories. State Department's armored Tesla contract, for instance, which Drop Site News revealed that the U.S. Department handled initially listed a $400 million contract for armored Teslas, right? These kinds of things. Jeffrey Epstein's connections to intelligence. Uh, He covered what was going on in Gaza, and he's somebody that definitely I'll trust. I'll put that in the chat. Here's one YouTube channel that because students, especially my 1302 class, will ask me where can I get informed, and the place that I refer students to is Breaking Points. I'll put that in the chat. And the reason why I really have a lot of respect for this YouTube channel is that they have a good spectrum between conservative voices and liberal voices. Um, and they have panels where they'll have conservatives and liberals, which is not unique, but you see that on CNN or Fox News, and it's just basically a screaming match where they yell at each other and call each other's names. And so the main hosts, Sajar Ajeti and Crystal Ball, they diametrically oppose each other ideologically, but not, and they do get heated, but not once have I ever seen them call each other a name. They never lose their dignity, even when they are heated. And I think that's really important, especially for the younger generation that has really no experience with that, which used to be the experience. It used to be possible to bring up an election or something political during Thanksgiving. I'll say that. And I think Breaking Points provides a medium for that for us to hear people who can disagree with each other and maintain dignity.
Well, I think what that speaks to is because the question that occurred to me just a few minutes ago is, do people have an inherent appetite for truth? And I think they do. It could just be natural to us that, Aristotle would say that human beings are naturally curious. We want to know things, but it could also be very practical. We want to know what's true so that we can better navigate this world that we're in. So I think if you have, a political position or posture or religious position or posture, you should be seeking out those who disagree with you. Because unless you think you've got God's capital T truth, it's engaging with opposing or conflicting or contrarian viewpoints that helps all of us get closer to that ever elusive thing called truth. I, I don't think a person gets there by themselves. But yeah, what I respect, I've never seen the show you're talking about, but what I respect is the idea I have my views, you have your views, but neither of us has the truth yet. Let's argue our way to get closer to it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and it points out the obvious thing is, one can learn from somebody else that you disagree with. Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't consider that. But it also, you pointed this out, critical thinking requires exercise. I know when I have conversations with people I viciously disagree with, and I'm able to have a dignified conversation, it it provides me a way to further fortify the things that I believe in, because inevitably somebody is going to point out things of, oh, I'm not sure about that, and perhaps in the conversation, I'm able to go to bring up stuff that I hadn't even considered on a conscious level, or to go do my homework and going, oh, okay, now I really now believe this because of what this person brought up. Or, you know, the occasion of, I think I've been wrong based on this person that I disagree with on a whole host of issues, but on this one issue, I agree with.
Yeah, and I'm putting in mind, not to derail the conversation, but I'm putting in mind of a philosopher like Nietzsche who would propose, everything is in flux. So as an organism, you are either growing or dying. If you are only listening to people who agree with you, you are not learning. And so if you're not learning, you're not growing. Ergo, you're dying a slow death,
Yeah,
intellectually and spiritually.
and it can feel that way, right? It can feel a feeling of death. Um, Yeah, I just wanted to share. It's in the chat for anyone who wants to listen to. But or not Miles Davis, Miles Diaz. He's going to play some trumpet for us after our discussion. Primary sources, yeah, great point. Primary sources. That way, one can discern their own judgment based on just verifiable facts. Oops, so I think we're losing Chris Nelson. Um, Lectures, professors. Oh, okay, excellent. We'll do our best. YouTube, some influencers like Adam Mockler, BTC, TYT, even these are very limited. Substack, yeah. Shelby pointed out Michelle Obama has a podcast with her brother that's very informative. Oh, wasn't aware of that. That would be interesting. But there are ads, but I enjoyed the intellectual aspect of the conversation. Yeah, I wouldn't say always discount somebody who has ads as somebody who's not able to be objective and hold on to some personal integrity. But it should give us pause when somebody is bringing in corporations and businesses to pay their bills, because that inevitably is going to have an influence, but it doesn't necessarily mean discount them. But it is a flag. Um,
Well, that can also be a flag in a positive way if and I'm putting in mind of, late night talk show hosts. If if these news orgs are openly critical of the companies and corporations who are sponsoring them, I'd chalk that up as a point in their favor.
Well, that's an interesting point. What's his name? Noam Chomsky pointed that out in what was the text? His seminal text. I'm forgetting. Somebody in the chat. I know there's a couple of people out there know what I'm talking about. It'll come to my mind. But he pointed out that, look at what they're advertising, and this is true today. And they don't talk about those things. So it's odd that MSNBC or CNN, ABC, Fox News advertises weapons manufacturers. Like, who watching that is in the business of a fighter jet? The reason why they are on there is, yeah, if you do get an aggressive journalist who is going, I'm looking at the military industrial complex and I'm noticing that they have failed 6 audits and they can't account for 62% of taxpayers' money, that journalist is gone. It happens all the time. So that's the danger. It precludes a journalist from doing their job because, well, that's where they get their paycheck from.
Well, and Sean, you can speak for yourself as an impoverished faculty member, but I've got that dean money, and my F-22 is on its way from Amazon.
Oh, excellent, excellent. Yeah, well, there's still hope for me. One day I will rise through the ivory tower here. Um, Shelby points out everyone's individual experience in life leads to choices and beliefs that you wouldn't know unless you took the time to have conversations with them. Yeah, absolutely. Right. And yeah, that gets to the point of community,
And
which
that and that also assumes civil conversations, right? Without that divisive tone and speaking, but not really listening to what the other side really has to say. You know?
Well, and again, think etymologically. Communication and community, they're fruits of the same root. So, true communication means a coming together and a communion and communion.
yeah.
So there's communication and then there's communication, I guess is my point.
And one thing I'd like to point out in the course of this conversation we're having right now is we have really grown accustomed to avoiding being uncomfortable, right? We avoid it like the plague. I do not want to be uncomfortable. So either I'm not going to tune in at all, or when I tune in, I'm only going to tune into people I agree with. And when I do engage with people that I disagree with, I'll be vicious. Um, and being
Or
vicious is the
cynically
way.
aloof.
What's that? Or aloof, yeah. But being vicious, I would point out, at least I know from experience, that's always a defense mechanism, right? Of not wanting to feel uncomfortable with somebody having a counter perspective that goes against your interests.
I was listening to sometimes in the drive home from classes I'll listen to some of the comedy channels on the XM radio, and I was listening to what the heck is his name? Trevor Noah. And Trevor Noah was talking about or discussing one of his trips to Europe and specifically Germany, and how the German nation doesn't hide behind false information about the country's history, right? Germany openly embraces the past. Germany doesn't hide what happened in the past, but in the current delivery in Germany, I think his point was that teachers and scholars are basically telling this generation, this is what happened in the past. We don't hide, and we don't whitewash, and we don't discuss the past, but it doesn't mean that you are responsible for the past. So this is the new German state. This is the new German direction, but you have to understand that you don't ignore the past and you embrace the past without transferring that guilt onto current generations, which I think is the big problem. One of the big problems about what we're going through in higher education today. We don't investigate, we're not allowed to investigate, we're not allowed to declare what took place historically in Texas or the South or the United States as a whole, because that makes folks uncomfortable. And like Shelby says, what does she say? Is this what you said, Shelby, Miss Shelby? Being uncomfortable keeps you stuck in the same mindset. And being uncomfortable is key to growth. And I think that kind of goes along with what Dr. Nelson was also saying.
And if Germany is actually insisting upon not ignoring the more horrific parts of their past, how are they ever going to make Germany great again?
Yeah, that does get to a really dark reality of ours. I mean, so far we have been somewhat successful in our curriculum being hijacked to some extent. But I mean, there's been proposals of getting rid of figures like Cesar Chavez, referring to enslaved people as laborers, um, bringing out any mention of white supremacy. That whole conversation that thankfully has died out. Critical race theory. Uh, there seems to be this pervasive need not to look at our past because, yeah, it makes us uncomfortable.
Well, I mean, but the corrective I would offer there is, yeah, I think that the first assault was frontally and direct and issue specific. You're right, a lot of that has died down, but what's been built up in its place, if anybody's paying attention, are the political structures to make this happen very, very easily.
Yeah,
They've stopped attacking with the rhetoric, so much, and they've actually started building political infrastructure, policies, legislation, education codes that are basically roadmaps for doing this in a strategic way at scale.
And long term, and
Yeah,
long.
yeah,
yeah, it is disturbing, and it's perplexing because I mean, obviously they're not interested in truth if they're wanting to dismiss any mention of white supremacy in United States history. Um, but it's like, how do you teach American history without focusing on the patriarchy and white supremacy? It
Or
doesn't
the
matter.
value of African American labor in building the country.
Yes,
I'm
great
sorry to
point.
jump in here,
No,
but
come on in.
if truth really does have a value, then constructing this view of history, which I never think they will succeed because you can't bury all these things. All these things are facts. But constructing that view weakens us as a country. I do. I did my outside field in German history in grad school, and Renee's right on. It is kind of interesting. There are some families that kind of forget the 30s and 40s a little bit when they talk about the past, but generally they face it, and I believe it's still they have a lot less free speech laws than us, and that's where I think they go wrong. But I think it's against the law to praise the Nazis in Germany still. Yeah, I mean, I guess our role is in maybe pushing back against some of that. And Chris, I hear what you're saying about listening to other views. I'm all for it. One problem I have though is I want to make sure that I'm hearing the views of an honest broker. If
Exactly.
somebody has a different side than me, I think too much of what's going on. Hunter Thompson had the great quote, "History's hard to know because of all the hired BS." And so I just want to know when it's being hired. But I definitely agree with you. We don't want to put our head in the sand. A lot of very important ideas in my life. The first time I heard them, I rejected them. I said, no, I don't agree with that. And it was kind of growing and remembering that in a kind of a dialectic way, ultimately was the most valuable. So anyway, guys, great thing. I had a student who was having a little trouble getting online here with you, so I checked everything out. I think she made it, but I just got kind of drawn in here. So
Awesome.
enjoy the conversation. Thank you.
yeah,
Thanks.
no,
No, and I think
join
that, I
in
mean,
anytime, Chris.
and that's what makes this again, to my advantage professionally, but maybe to our detriment as human beings. It makes this a philosophical problem through and through. I want to communicate with somebody because that gets us closer to the truth, but I want to do that with somebody I can trust. So I already have to have a handle on the truth to know who I can trust before we can go looking for the truth. It's the people we have, the people who are looking for truth and are all about communion and community. We have an uphill battle
Yeah, and
because it's
this is
work.
something I've been
It takes
considering.
work.
Yeah, this is something I've been considering just teaching survey courses, especially in 1302. when we look at the Industrial Revolution. And what I've come to fully appreciate and realize is the Industrial Revolution disempowered us, right? We are now incapable of so many things that people prior, and I'm not trying to make an argument that people were empowered prior to the Industrial Revolution. They certainly had their problems and had to grapple with power, but it took it down to the individual level of disempowering people by centralizing the economy and political institutions from generation to generation. So with the first generation of the Industrial Revolution, it wipes out the artisan class. And I can imagine the psychological and dysfunctional effects that had on the family simply by I can envision like a young man seeing their father who was once able to support his family through his artisan trade now reduced to a factory worker, and all of the dysfunction that comes with that, his broken body, his broken spirit. And then and this is only increased with each generation, subsequent generation since the Industrial Revolution. And at one point, probably, in the first two generations, people were probably keenly aware of their disempowerment. But now I think we are lost in, we don't even know that we're disempowered. And if we do know we're disempowered, what's the source of that disempowered? Like we are unable to work, to build homes, to farm, to hunt, to subsist for ourselves anymore. And really what the Industrial Revolution has done, and probably the entire political system, even prior to the Industrial Revolution, stemming from colonialism, is to centralize things, commercialize things that once people did for themselves, right? It's something I think we need to be aware of. And it's sort of like being an alcoholic, right? You go to AA and the first thing you do is you introduce your name and you say, I'm an alcoholic. I think we need to go to admit we are disempowered people, and then to be vigilant and looking around going, how can I empower myself? Right? And look for the small wins to empower. So when I tell my students, what does that look like in the classroom? Be aware of due dates. Prepare and submit your assignments. Come to class on time. Those are small wins that will empower you. And that empowerment builds upon itself. And, initially, you might feel kind of anxious and unsteady, but there will come a point where, no, despite the fact that there are so many forces against me, I am an empowered individual and I can stand up for myself and my community and build this community to where it needs to be, a flourishing community.
Yeah, and I like that, the idea that we are born into and inherit a disempowered position, but we don't really know that. And if anybody wants a really mundane analogy to fix that side of mind, I mean, people as old as Chris and Renee and Sean and I remember in high school, none of us could afford cars other than old 60s and 70s beaters, but every one of us could fix anything that went wrong with that car.
Yeah, I quit working
Go
on my
buy a
car
new.
after VW bugs and
Oh
buses.
yeah, you need like three tools,
Mhm.
and you knew what every part of the car did. No problem.
And,
Go open the hood of a new car today.
and no electronics that
Yeah, but
did
no,
everything.
but think about somebody who's maybe 16, 17 years old today. That of course I don't know how to work on a car. It's like, what do you mean I'm disempowered? I've never had power.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Go change the flapper on a toilet, for God's sake.
Good point, but to kind of, I totally agree with what Sean said. But to get on the to speak good for the industrial revolution, a lot of things are better. We've got a lot of conveniences, and it's created a lot of new tools like this one to connect. Online. I remember early internet days and almost discussion boards and putting in connection with just in many dozens of different ways other people around the world that you never knew shared interests, or even doing this on a Friday afternoon and bringing in a diverse group of people like this and talking about these ideas. These are opportunities as well, I think.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And if you talk about small victories, especially, here's a small victory right here today.
Amen.
Chris reminded me when I was at Virginia Tech, working at Virginia Tech, this was published by Dr. Annette Markham, and this was her first monograph, and she looked at researching and exploring and dabbling into the virtual sphere when they were just chat rooms to pop into. So this is a really, really interesting read from a time frame. When did she publish this? Let me see here. She published this work in,
Got to be the late 90s, right?
yeah, 1990. Oh, here's the frontispiece. Sorry. It's,
Online.
God,
In the
where is
90s.
it? 1998. So this is the precursors to a lot of the stuff that Dr. Chris just mentioned. And if there was any good that came out of the lockdown year, it's this, right? As Chris was saying, it's this is a benefit from our lockout year, frankly.
All right. Um, I'm just going through my notes to see if there's anything that we. Oh, yeah, the endless repetition. I really liked his term shamanic incantation, which is a really interesting thing to focus on. The use of slogans and nicknames and insults designed to make people to make the fictional plausible of criminal desirabilities and lock her up, getting people to chant. It really has a religious aspect to it. And what I find interesting about that is I've come to realize that there is a real need for humans to be entranced. It's almost as critical as food and water. The problem is what kind of entrancement. But we are all in a trance, right? This is an entrancement. Chasing status and money is an entrancement. Um, but there are healthy ways, critical ways of being entranced: meditation, prayer, reading scripture, being part of in unison in a community ritual. But yeah, a shrewd and cynical, power-hungry politician, I think, is keenly aware of that, and it is something we need to be vigilant about. Um, and it's not just from politicians that we might disagree with. Politicians that we do agree with know that tactic, and I think we need to be careful of it because in that if we're ever to get on track, we need to find common ground. So there's this tendency, there's this what I'm seeing more and more out there in social media are people who voted for Donald Trump who are coming out and going, "I was wrong, I was duped," and they're apologizing and they're getting viciously attacked for it. Right? You should have known. I don't forgive you. And there's no avenue for these people to be well. Great, welcome aboard. Now let's talk and see what our shared issues are, our shared concerns. Now that you're not just looking at one person to solve all of your problems.
Yeah, and my first pass at the shamanistic incantation paragraph was, and I forget the quote, but something to the effect of, if you tell the lie long enough, they'll print the lie.
Mhm.
That was my first take on this. I hadn't picked up on the sort of quasi spiritual dimension of this, and I should have. I mean, it's shamanistic. So thanks for bringing that to the forefront, Sean. But I'm not sure that all demagogues who could be seen utilizing this as a strategy are aware of its underpinnings. I think a lot of them are probably just sort of entranced with the audience, entrancement with them. I won't name any names, but yet I don't think you have to be a spiritual genius to actually have this effect on people. And then once you've had this effect on people, it's kind of, whoa, I must be God.
Yeah, I imagine it's quite intoxicating
Yeah.
having, just like a young rock star being 19 years old and having tens of thousands of people. It kind of goes to your head and hijacks your heart to
Yeah.
where you become just a living embodiment of ego.
Yeah. Just as desire for the other could really be desire for the desire of the other. I think we could talk about, entrancement with the other's entrancement.
Mm, yeah.
Snyder has a lot of really interesting messages, and 10 and 11 are, I like them quite a lot, frankly. I mean, they really speak to what's, of course, what's happening, but you can always take a lot of those lessons and transfer them back into our history, whether it's national history or at least U.S. history, or specific down to the state of Texas or locally here, wherever. And they're very, very universal in application, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, the chat has died down a little bit, but please do jump in if there is any insight, any information, any questions, or simply open up your mic just as a reminder.
I think I was struck by what Chris Davis said about, you know, recognition of African history and African American history, and it jogged to my mind that a lot of the East Coast universities, some of those universities were built on the backs of slave labor, right? I think I don't UVA, I'm sorry, University of Virginia for certain. I'm not sure about William and Mary or any others, but I think UVA has just in what in the last 10 to 12 years, maybe 15, has basically acknowledged that participation. So they're not, so grudgingly, I guess they've come to embrace that history that has been hidden, cloaked, or not really discussed previously in the past, and now they have that recognition, that tacit recognition.
And in my opinion, you know, that makes us stronger, recognizing that. I
Yeah.
think maybe some of this comes down to temperament. You know, some of us embrace change, some of us find, you know, a lot of my relatives, you could go way back, they're from the South, you can find a lot of bad things, I'm sure, but I don't feel that that condemns me in any way. I think it makes it a better world, but other people react differently to that. And I would just add, you know, just even those schools, what's been found out a lot in the last decade or two, a lot of the Ivy League schools are built in not only physical ways, but investments in the, you know, the slave trade, the international slave trade way back in their endowment. You know, so it's intricately linked. You know, the great black historian Henry Louis Gates Jr. said, you know, basically that African American history is no sideshow, and American history is the main event. And I would say that you know, we can weave you know, everybody's story into that, and personally to me it just makes us stronger. But maybe that's like I'm saying a matter, and maybe a philosophy perspective might be better on this, but maybe that's a human nature type question.
Well, and I'm putting in mind of something you said earlier, Chris, and I think on the macro level, I'd bring it down to the micro level. I think that move by UVA, if it doesn't simply transform into, you know, virtue signaling, then it makes them a stronger university. Because I think, you know, all things being equal, you know, we're a university. What are you about? We're about the pursuit of truth. Look at all that shit you're hiding over there. What about
Yeah.
that?
Right. Oh, yeah. Right. Right. Yeah.
Nothing to see there. We're about the truth. So yeah, this makes for a stronger university and community of inquiry in my mind.
And if we are a meritocracy, you know, we're going to be stronger by including everyone. You know, if that's African Americans in that case, bringing them into the discussion, making them feel like more of that is their university, or anybody else anywhere around the country, I just see it as a positive.
Okay, and now I want to get to Laura's
Yeah.
and in the chat because this is something that occurred to me early on in the conversation when I was wondering if people have an appetite for truth. And I proposed, perhaps naively or prematurely, I think they do. It might be inherent in what makes us human, but I like the way she set this up as an interesting pairing. You know, are people inherently curious, or is it just some of us?
Mm.
And others are desirous of the fairy tale, the comfort. I'm inclined to try and complicate it and say maybe all of us are a synthesis of both of these things, and it's going to be a question of, you know, which wolf you feed. But I don't know. I'm thinking out loud here.
Yeah.
And Shelby brings up a good point. Yeah, it's African American history, but it's also First Nation history. It's the gendered experience in the U.S. and Texas. It's the Mexican American experience in Texas. I mean, you can just go, you know, all kinds of different routes and different ways on what is not hiding behind. Like you said, don't ignore, don't pay attention to that stuff. Pay attention to what this is over here, and not that. And I think in the last what 5 to 7 years a radical reinterpretation of Texas Republic, the Austin Colony, and that Texas independence from Mexico was in many ways a way for that colony and those individuals in the colony to protect slavery, the economy linked to cotton, and to not really, I mean, couched in the language of liberty and freedom and so on, but really to protect the the slave labor economy based on cotton production and the profitability that came from cotton production linked to slavery and to the slave status.
Yeah.
Which I think Dr. English at UTRGV would probably look
Yeah,
at it.
I was going to say, I think I first heard that argument about 17 years ago in the
Yeah.
Rainbow Room on STC's campus from Raul Ramos, who, one of our great Texas historians. And I would also echo kind of what Ben Johnson's been running around saying that especially, Texas history nowadays, Texas, it is American history, the issues link anyway. So, yeah, thanks for that.
And that's a great work, to be honest. Dr. Johnson's work is great. That Texas placing it in a larger construct as U.S. history. It's really it's interesting. And his talk when he came to the UTRGV campus was really about all of that. Frankly, it
Well,
was
then
really
let me, I mean, can I blow some more in air into that expanding universe? And you can't, I mean, Texas history is U.S. history. But then can you do U.S. history without world history? And I think that's
Oh,
something that certain elements of our population are deeply averse and allergic to.
great point.
yeah.
Yeah.
Which flies in the face of American exceptionalism and all that kind of stuff.
Precisely. Precisely.
Well, this is a good point, and toggles with something that is coming to mind. With it begs the question of why do we try? Why is there an effort to try to hide the contributions of African Americans, of women, of Native Americans? Um, well, much of that history is built on oppression and wealth accumulation, and so to hide that history, it um, further fortifies just this narrative that really what matters is personal wealth accumulation and concentration of wealth. Um, that really detracts and highlights the inability, or at least the difficulty for democracy and capitalism to coexist with each other. Um, and you could see this quite plainly in just the reality of the plantation system. Why was Thomas Jefferson a wealthy, powerful individual? Well, he was extracting the wealth that his enslaved people were producing for him. They were producing the wealth. He was simply just putting it in his pocket. Um, and it gets me to just getting back to lesson 10 in this in trying to really understand really what we're talking about when it comes to democracy and our rights. This one of these the last point he brings up of what gets in the way of truth, misplaced faith in leaders, self-defying claims by a leader such as "I can solve it alone," "I am your voice," which leaves no room for individual discernment or experience. That's a real problem, right? And this is something I think a disempowered population is going to tend to do. They're going to look for people who have all of the answers, which is by definition dysfunctional, not just on the national level, but even within a household. So if you live in a family with the paradigm of the husband is the head of the household and what he says goes, you're going to have dysfunction. You're going to that husband is inevitably going to have a spouse that is void of a soul and joy from being oppressed and having their agency taken away from them. And you can telescope that out up into the national stage as well. Um, it's something that I don't think a lot of people give thought to, but this idea that somebody has the answers is really dangerous. Simply just, and that can be examined. I mean, everybody knows the feeling of and the experience of being absolutely positive that they were right about something,
Mhm.
only to reflect on it 6 months going, I am deeply embarrassed and ashamed about how wrong I was. And
Well,
so,
that's that. I mean, that puts me in mind of the great Mark Twain quote that that I think is the epigraph for the movie The Big Short. It ain't what you don't know that gets you in trouble. It's what you know for sure, but just ain't so.
Mark Twain, man. We should read more of them. Shelby, oh, this looks very interesting what she just posted. I enjoy the transparency from these courses because in high school we're taught about the Alamo and it made it seem as if there were the right to take Texas from Mexico, just like Manifest Destiny was sold as our God-given right to expand when in reality it was brutal to whoever was in the way of their mission.
And I think that this connects with what you were saying just a minute ago, that this highlights sort of the dark demonic side of meritocracy. That if you can hide, where your wealth has come from, then you appear to be. I got here on merit, obviously. Look at how meritorious I am. I'm rich. I'm in charge. I'm happy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then disempowered people say, well, in order to be happy, I just need to make a whole lot of money. And
Well,
they
but no, but then we tell those people, but no, you can't because you obviously don't have merit. Otherwise, you'd be rich. I mean, we joke about it, but I
well,
mean,
it gets to the
there's all this
Protestant work
talk.
ethic.
There's all this talk about, let's make everything merit based.
Yeah.
Admissions to college should be merit based. Do they really mean merit based?
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Connection based.
and merit oftentimes is not really defined very, very clearly, right? It's kind
No.
of this moving target of what is and what is not merit or merit based, and that target is constantly shifting depending on who you're listening to.
And how willing will they be to look at structural factors in determining just how meritocratic somebody is?
Well, I think be careful how loud you ask that question because
Yeah,
a couple states in the union are pretty close to outlawing questions like that in higher education.
well, it reminds me, I just was teaching in U.S. history too, the rise of big business and social Darwinism.
Yeah.
We, a lot of us, still very influential, the idea of the best kind of succeeding and stuff. I find myself, kind of in a fair classroom, encouraging accomplishment like that. So it's a difficult question, I think.
But
Well,
an
but
interesting one.
that's what happens in a post-truth era. The tools and tactics of one side or movement can be absolutely co-opted and corrupted by the enemy.
Mm.
And then that gets us back to Orwell, the double speak. Well, there's merit, and then I can take that. No, there's merit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting question that we wrangle with. I mean, on the one hand, there has to be enough merit to encourage us all to work hard, to encourage all these students, to come to school. They do it because they know that in the long run, a degree pays off. On the other hand, though, I think if we're going to make admissions, especially based on merit, we have to look at the structural factors. Any class you look at, if you're trying to find the top performers, it's still true that'll be the people whose parents make the most money and whose parents have the most education. So I guess the difficulty is how do you have a meritocracy that accounts for those factors as well?
Yeah. And then I would just like to highlight, and sort of toot our own horns as an open access institution. What I would pitch to our students is we want you here because none of us has the truth yet. And we're going to need your help.
Oh, yeah.
Join the community of inquiry.
Great point. Yeah, that is something I really encourage class discussions that I provide, you questions ahead of time. And, what I let my students know is, yeah, I'm here for a paycheck, but the real currency is when you prepare for a class discussion, that's the real currency here. I get to learn from you.
Yeah.
Because there's, if we're reading a book, there's going to inevitably things within the text that I missed, simply based on it didn't really reflect my lived experience, and now you're bringing your lived experience to that perspective.
Another piece of the puzzle.
Oh yeah, Miles Diaz, that's the pedagogy of the oppressed, right there.
Oh, a Freire reference.
Yeah, that
Excellent.
yeah, great text that we might we should, as a department, revisit. Maybe I'll bring that up to Joel.
Gosh, I guess I am really old, but anybody who was in the department the first time I was chair should still have a copy of that book.
I do. It's right.
Right?
It's behind me, behind
Mine's
this.
right there. Yep.
Yeah, I
Could
need
could
to.
that be a common reading text? But you have to pay for it though, right? So,
Oh, yeah, good point. But yeah, that would be
free
free
online.
online. Okay, yes, yeah, that is something that we should consider. That gave me a lot of
Yeah.
as I
Relevance for literature, for philosophy, for history, for sociology, for education. This common reading program could expand across divisions like never before if
mhm.
the English department can be convinced to go that direction.
Who's chairing that currently, Chris?
That's
That
Carissa Hayden.
okay. I'll definitely bring that up to her.
Yeah, I think we ought to. Yeah, I agree. I agree.
All right. Any last brilliant insights or thoughts? We've still got another 10 minutes, but
Sorry, what was the book?
Pedagogy of the Oppressed.
Okay, okay.
Paulo Freire.
yeah, well, my first semester teaching here, Gilbert Reyes insisted that we all collectively read it, and I think we had a couple of discussions on it. But I remember being a first, it was only my, yeah, there it is.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, a couple of years into teaching, I remember that having a huge impact that made me question a lot of assumptions I had about what I was bringing to the table as an
Those
educator.
were some fiery intellectual times in the
Yeah.
department.
No.
I got in right on the end of it. I was part of the emails, kind of my first semester I was teaching class. Yeah.
No, but what I find, I mean, hilarious and upbuilding is that for generations, pedagogy of the oppressed, it's so politically charged and it's controversial and you shouldn't be teaching it. Now, day after day, I can't go a day without somebody proposing some reform to education. And I'm like, okay, that makes you a Freirean Marxist.
Well, I think we could wrap this up, unless
But
somebody
then
wants to jump.
before we do,
Yeah.
I looked and I don't have a time blocked off for the Dr. Sikkema talk next week. Has that been scheduled already?
Yeah, that's scheduled. I'll send you the flyer after this, and
Oh,
I'm gonna throw out the flyer first thing Monday morning so people are aware of it. But
very
that
cool.
should be a great discussion. And then again, just to remind people, we will also be having so yeah, just to really articulate this. So next week, March 13th, philosopher James Sikkema will be discussing the lessons 14 and 19, establish a private life and be a patriot. And then also March 27th, Martha Cantu will be joining us for an examination of the patriarchy. We'll be taking a look at two books that we've collectively read throughout the college through the common reading program, Incidents of the Life of the Slave Girl and The Yellow Wallpaper, which take the perspective of women who are faced with oppression from two different lived experiences, but all tied to the patriarchy, which I have become more and more convinced, because I'm very slow to realizing these sorts of things. But the theme of U.S. history is the patriarchy. It is something that our economic, our political, our social institutions are very much still influenced by the family institution as well. And it's something that we need to reconcile with, because it's what I try to point out to my students. This isn't pro women, anti men. It's actually, it can be framed of, no, this is pro men, because the patriarchy reduces, in many instances, men to little boys. Uh,
All right, Sean, you're a faculty, I'm your dean. Go clean your room.
Yeah. Oh, it's going to get messy here. All right. I'm going to put into the chat for my students. And if you happen to be here from another instructor, feel free to put your information here, but this is the sign-in sheet. And it should be in edit mode. Let me know if it's not. I'll check actually. Yep, it is. Good, good, good. Well, I really thank you, Chris and Renee, and thank you, Chris Davis, for jumping in. For those that don't know who are here, Chris Davis is a historian here as well. He specializes in sports history. So if you're interested in sports and you're want to take a U.S. history class, you'll get a lot from him on that. And I thank the students and people
Yeah.
from the community. There's some people here I know that aren't part of the STC family, or they might be. I just might be aware of it. I know they came from an outside source. Thank you for being here. These conversations are critical, and my hope is to get through this entire book. So this is we've got through 4 chapters. We're going to get through another, so that's 6 chapters. If anybody out there wants to get a hold of me, please, um, and I'll be happy to discuss these lessons with anybody within this format.
Yeah, I'd also like to echo the thanks to all the attendees here for all the provocations in the chat.
Yeah, it was a vibrant chat today.
Really wonderful.
Sometimes that's not the case, so I really, really appreciate.
Forcing me to think on a Friday afternoon. Whew.
Whew, a lot to ask.
Yeah, if I agree, if any of the attendees are from my UTRGV class or my STC class, thank you for coming, and I hope that you enjoy the presentation today. And thanks for giving up part of your Friday.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, no problem, Miles. And yeah, you guys have a great afternoon and enjoy your weekend. And for my students, we'll be back for more. And the march will be happening on March 12th for our mock labor protest. More to come. I'll let you guys know in pronto.
All right.
Thanks,
Thanks,
y'all.
everybody.
Thank you.
Happy
Thanks, y'all.
Friday.
Have a good day, y'all. Take care. Thanks, Sean. I appreciate it, man. Thanks
Oh,
for
yeah.
coming.
Yeah, absolutely, Renee.
Have,
Thank you for joining.
yeah, have a good weekend now, okay?
Yeah, take
All right.
care.